Hello, welcome back. In this module, we will be discussing the different ways that you can collect data as a social scientist. So we're going to go through three different types, surveys, longitudinal surveys or panel surveys, and experiments. We'll talk about what each one is and what that data can be used to infer from there, because there are limitations of each type. So the first that we're going to talk about is surveys. A survey is just a questionnaire that you send out. We're using a survey to collect data in this class that we will be analyzing later. But it's just a list of questions that you can put together, and all the answers to these questions based on your participants can be used to show certain relationships between variables. So you can say this variable and this variable are highly correlated, or there's a difference between men and women based on this other variable, something along those lines. A longitudinal study or a panel survey, slightly variation on the names in this type, is multiple surveys sent out to the same population over time. So one week you will send out a survey, and then the next week you will send out a survey. And something probably potentially occurred during that time period to change some answer that you want. Now this type of design can be used to show that there are relationships between variables, just like in a survey. But it can also go about showing causality because you're getting a pre-measure of some sort of variable, and then something is happening, time is passing, and you are getting a post-measure. Longitudinal designs are generally something that you had a treatment, some sort of maybe an experimental treatment in the beginning, or you know that something is happening like a political campaign or something along those lines in between your two time periods. There's something socially that's occurring, something along those lines. Maybe you're doing medical studies, like they do a lot of longitudinal designs on drug studies where they take measurements at different time periods. That is a longitudinal type of design, and it's a pretty useful way to get some pretty decent data and let you infer some sort of things about causality. There are three aspects to showing that a causal relationship exists. The first is that time has passed. So you have a time one and a time two, and the longitudinal study gets at that very well. The second is that a relationship exists between the two variables that you're studying. So just that there is a relationship there, that's a very important, very key part of any causal relationship. And the final is the removal of other potential causes, like, so you need to cut out other things that could have potentially caused the relationship to occur. A longitudinal design is not good at that one aspect of causality, but an experiment is, and that's kind of the difference. So an experiment, generally speaking, involves a pre-measure, some sort of experimental treatment, the exposure to some sort of stimulus, and then a post-measure on the same variable. There are different ways to go about doing that. That is a single type of cell design. You may have a control and an experimental group, in which case you may not need to have the pre-measure. You can just have the post-measure if it's the same variable, so you can see a difference between those two groups, something along those lines. The key aspect to an experiment is making sure that you control all of the other things that are occurring as much as possible. You want to eliminate potential other hypotheses, both through your own influence in the experimental setting, as much as possible. More so than you don't have that ability with a longitudinal study. So that's what you need to do with an experimental study. And it is difficult. There needs to be a lot of thought put into it overall. There are several different types of experimental design. The first and most simple is kind of a quasi single unit experiment where you just have a pre-test, a exposure to some sort of stimulus, and then a post-test on the same variable. So you're looking change between the two times on a single unit. Then you can have a control and experimental treatment, and then we'll have post-test only. You could have a control and experimental, a pre-test and a post-test, and then you can also combine those two together. So you have control experimental with only the pre-test, and a control and experimental with a pre-test and a post-test. So that gets really complex. You have a lot of different data to work with at that point in time, and you need a very large amount of participants to be able to achieve any sort of statistical significance in the relationships that you're looking for. So that's not really done that often, but you do see it in some grant-funded research that's really expensive. So a way that some people have used, actually, excuse me, I'll take a step back. When you have a pre-test and a post-test on the same cell, that is called a within subjects test. And that takes a special type of statistical procedure to show that any sort of relationship exists. There is some confounding influence caused by taking a measure twice. So the test that you do run try to control for that variable. So those different types of tests that you run for within subjects compared to between subjects. For example, if you're examining the post-test only on the difference between the two cells. So that is a very quick discussion on the different types of data collection. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask them below. For our discussion question in this module, I would like you to think of some sort of hypothesis or question if you don't necessarily have the hypothesis completely worked out. Like, what are you searching for? What do you wish to investigate? Formulate a hypothesis if you can. If you know some theory or have some thoughts about predicting some sort of relationship, go ahead and try to form a hypothesis. If you can't, just post a question that you would like to answer, maybe something you would like to examine. And then try to think of what sort of data collection design could be used to answer that question. So to answer your question or to investigate your hypothesis, would you use a survey, a longitudinal survey, or an experiment? What would that potentially look like? So just post that below and we can talk about it there. This is the last module for this week, so I will see you in the discussion comments below.